Hello, everyone. Welcome to Learn English with Stories. Here you'll improve your English through simple, meaningful, and fun stories. So relax, listen, and let's learn together. At exactly 4 o'clock each afternoon, the light in the park shifted. It was not dramatic. The sun did not suddenly blaze brighter or dim into gold. But something subtle happened in that hour between the rush of day and the hush of evening. The air softened, shadows lengthened, the city exhaled, and on a wooden bench facing a narrow walking path, two separate lives began to overlap. Lena first chose the bench because it faced away from the playground. Children were too loud, too unfiltered. Their joy felt sharp on days when her thoughts were heavy. She preferred the side of the park that overlooked the older trees, where the branches tangled together like quiet secrets. The bench was slightly worn, its paint fading at the edges, its wood warmed by years of afternoon sun. It was nothing special. That was precisely why she liked it. Lena had spent most of her life feeling almost special, almost talented enough, almost brave enough, almost confident enough. At art school, almost became a constant companion. She was surrounded by canvases that screamed for attention, colors that demanded to be seen, students who spoke about inspiration as if it burned inside them like a permanent flame. Her inspiration did not burn. It flickered. Sometimes it disappeared entirely. At 4 o'clock, she allowed herself to stop performing. She did not have to explain her concepts or defend her brushstrokes. She did not have to compare her portfolio to anyone else's. She could simply sit, watch, breathe. Kai found the bench for different reasons. His days were structured down to the minute. Meetings, deadlines, expectations wrapped neatly in professional language. He had recently stepped into a role that required decisiveness, and decisiveness did not come naturally to him. He had always been thoughtful, careful, someone who measured consequences twice before acting. Now he was expected to decide quickly. At home, the silence amplified everything. The apartment felt too still after long days filled with pressure. The ticking clock, the hum of the refrigerator, the faint echo of his own footsteps. They all reminded him that adulthood was no longer approaching. It had arrived. The park at 4 o'clock offered something else. It was not silent, but it was not overwhelming. The balance comforted him. The first time they sat on the bench together, they did not speak. There had been enough room for both of them, a polite distance maintained. Lena had kept her sketchbook on her lap. Kai had scrolled absently on his phone. Their shoulders never touched. But awareness lingered. The second afternoon, he arrived first. The third, she did. By the fourth day, they recognized each other with the smallest acknowledgement. A nod that said, "You again." Routine formed quietly. It began with small exchanges. Observations about the weather, about the old man who walked the same path with his golden retriever, about the way the wind carried the scent of street food from the nearby corner. Nothing intimate, nothing risky. Yet in that unremarkable hour, something steady began to build. Lena discovered that Kai listened without interrupting. When she mentioned struggling with a piece she was working on, he did not offer solutions. He asked questions that made her think. Questions about what she had wanted the painting to feel like before it became complicated. Kai discovered that Lena noticed details most people overlooked. She could describe the color of the sky not simply as blue or orange, but as something in between, something uncertain and beautiful. Their conversation stretched longer each week. They began to speak about fear, though not all at once. Lena admitted that sometimes she stood in front of her canvas for hours, unable to make the first mark because she feared ruining the possibility of something good. Kai admitted that sometimes he stayed late at work not because he needed to, but because leaving meant facing the quiet apartment and his own self-doubt. At 4 o'clock, vulnerability felt less dangerous. The bench became more than wood and metal. It became a boundary between the world that demanded and the space that allowed. As autumn approached, the light shifted earlier. Leaves gathered at their feet. The air cooled, but neither of them suggested meeting somewhere else. They did not need to define what they were becoming. There was comfort in not naming it. And yet, beneath the surface, something unnamed grew roots. Lena began to measure her days not by deadlines, but by the approach of that hour. If criticism in class cut deeper than she expected, she told herself she could survive until 4. If her creativity stalled, she reminded herself that perspective often returned on that bench. Kai began to carry thoughts with him intentionally, saving them. Observations he would have dismissed before now felt worth sharing. He caught himself looking at his watch at 3:47 p.m., calculating the time it would take to reach the park. Neither of them acknowledged the shift. It was easier to pretend the bench was the center, not the person sitting beside them. Then opportunity arrived, as it always does, disguised as progress. Lena's professor nominated her for a 6-month exhibition program in another city. The kind of program that could open doors, reshape portfolios, rewrite futures. It was everything she had quietly hoped for, and everything that threatened the fragile ecosystem she had built at 4 o'clock. The acceptance email felt heavy in her inbox. For 2 days, she said nothing. When she finally told Kai, the sun was particularly bright. The park seemed indifferent to her news. Leaves continued falling. People continued walking. He reacted exactly as she knew he would. Proud, encouraging, steady. But pride and fear can exist in the same body. That afternoon when she left, the space beside him felt newly fragile. The weeks leading to her departure were filled with preparation, lists, packing, administrative details that left little room for sentimentality. They continued meeting at 4, but the conversations carried an undercurrent neither of them wanted to examine too closely. Endings are easier when they are abrupt. This one approached slowly. On her final day before leaving, the light was softer than usual, as if the sky understood transition. The bench felt the same beneath them. Solid. Familiar. For the first time, silence stretched longer than comfort allowed. They were not afraid of distance itself. They were afraid of what distance might quietly erode. When Lena boarded the train the next morning, the city moved forward without ceremony. At 4 o'clock that afternoon, Kai still went to the park. The bench did not ask questions. He sat down anyway. And in the space where routine once lived, absence began its careful work. Distance does not begin with miles. It begins with timing. At first, they were careful. Kai still went to the bench at 4 o'clock every afternoon. He told himself it was about routine, about grounding, about preserving something stable while everything else shifted. But routine without presence feels different. It becomes a ritual instead of a meeting. He started recording voice messages instead of speaking into open air. He described the park in unnecessary detail, the way the leaves were thinning, the new crack along the bench's left side, the golden retriever that now limped slightly with age. He spoke as if she were still sitting beside him. In the new city, Lena adjusted to a life that moved faster than she expected. The exhibition program was competitive in ways her old classroom had not been. Artists worked late into the night. Ideas were dissected publicly. Feedback was sharp but efficient. There was no room for hesitation. Her small studio apartment overlooked a busy intersection. Car lights replaced sunset. Sirens replaced birds. 4 o'clock there did not feel like a pause. It felt like the middle of everything. Still, she checked her phone around that time each day. At first, their messages were long, thoughtful, reflective. They described not only what had happened, but how it had felt. They narrated their separate worlds carefully, stitching the distance with intention. Kai learned the layout of her studio through her descriptions. Lena memorized the pattern of shadows across the bench from his recordings. But life rarely maintains its initial intensity. Deadlines tightened around Lena's days. She began staying later at the gallery. The other artists formed quick bonds through shared exhaustion. There were impromptu dinners, spontaneous brainstorming sessions, nights when she returned home too tired to do more than collapse onto her bed. Kai's responsibilities expanded too. A new project at work demanded leadership he wasn't entirely confident he possessed. Decisions piled up. Mistakes felt heavier. There were evenings when he left the office later than planned, arriving at the park with only a few minutes of daylight left. Messages became shorter, not intentionally, just gradually. He would send updates that required more energy to answer than she had left. She would respond the next morning instead of immediately. He would read it during a meeting and promise himself he would reply thoughtfully later. Later sometimes meant tomorrow. Neither of them addressed it. They both believed love was patient. But patience without reassurance can start to feel like waiting. Kai began to notice something unsettling. He was learning about her new life in fragments. A new friend mentioned casually. A breakthrough in her art described briefly. An invitation to an industry event summarized in 2 sentences. He was proud, and increasingly aware that pride did not eliminate distance. At the bench, he found himself studying the empty space beside him more often. He imagined her reactions to things he saw. The elderly couple who now held hands while walking. The child who attempted to climb the lowest tree branch and failed repeatedly before succeeding. He wanted to narrate these moments in real time. But time zones and schedules do not bend easily. Meanwhile, Lena felt the weight of transformation. Her work began to shift under the influence of new techniques and critiques. She experimented more boldly. She took risks she would have avoided months earlier. Confidence, fragile but real, started to build. Yet growth is rarely comfortable. There were nights she questioned whether she was becoming someone unfamiliar. Someone who belonged more to this city of sharp edges and constant motion than to the quiet park at 4 o'clock. She missed the simplicity of sitting without expectation. She missed the way silence once felt shared rather than solitary. One evening, after a particularly exhausting day at the gallery, she replayed one of Kai's older voice messages. It had been recorded in early autumn when the leaves were just beginning to turn. His voice had carried a steadiness that felt grounding, as if the bench itself had spoken through him. Now, When he spoke, there was something else beneath the steadiness. Restraint. He did not complain. He did not accuse. But his pauses lasted longer. His updates felt edited, as though he were filtering out anything that might burden her. She recognized the pattern. She was doing the same. They were protecting each other from the truth. That effort required energy neither of them consistently had. Distance began to shift from physical to emotional. It manifested in subtle ways, in missed calls, in reactions sent without follow-up, in stories told hours after they happened instead of immediately. The rhythm that once aligned naturally now required coordination. And coordination is exhausting. One afternoon, Kai arrived at the bench and realized he had nothing specific to share. Not because nothing had happened, but because he no longer knew which details would matter to her. He hesitated before pressing record. For the first time, the bench felt like a memory instead of a present reality. Across the city skyline, Lena stood in the gallery as guests moved between paintings. Her featured piece hung under soft lighting, its colors deeper and more confident than anything she had created before. Viewers lingered. Some took notes. A curator asked thoughtful questions. She should have felt only triumph. Instead, she felt a strange dislocation. Success is loud. Pride from others is immediate. But the kind of validation she had grown accustomed to at 4 o'clock had been quiet and personal. It had not required explanation. That night, she returned home and stared at the ceiling, calculating the months remaining. The countdown felt both manageable and endless. Back at the park, winter began creeping in. The bench grew colder. Fewer people passed by. The golden retriever stopped appearing altogether. Kai continued showing up, but less rigidly at 4. Sometimes 4:10, sometimes 4:25. The symbolism of the exact minute felt less urgent when the person it mattered to was not physically there. He began to question something he had avoided asking himself. Was holding onto the bench a way of holding on to her? Or a way of avoiding the possibility that things were changing? Because they were changing. Growth does not pause for love. It reshapes it. Lena was becoming braver, sharper, more independent in ways that required less reassurance. Kai was becoming more decisive, more comfortable in his authority, less afraid of silence at home. They were evolving separately. An evolution, though beautiful, can create unfamiliar terrain. The next time they scheduled a video call, both felt an undercurrent of tension they could not name. The screen flickered. The connection lagged briefly. Their smiles were real, but cautious. For the first time since her departure, the possibility that love might not be immune to time hovered between them. Not dramatically, not destructively, just quietly. Like winter settling into the wood of a bench that had once held summer warmth.